A homeless man danced with the CEO's blind daughter. His worn-out hands gently guided the girl across the dance floor as the sounds of Chopin's Polonaise filled the elegant hall of the National Philharmonic. None of the gathered guests saw the woman in a black evening gown freeze at the entrance, her champagne glass trembling in her hand. No one noticed how her face paled as she looked at the dancing couple. No one heard her whisper the name she hadn't spoken in 15 years, the name of the man she buried in her memories and heart. Marek Kowalczyk squeezed deeper into the dark corner of the National Philharmonic's foyer as the wind picked up outside, carrying billows of snow with it. In his 45 years of life, he had seen many Warsaw winters, but this one promised to be particularly harsh. The temperature dropped to 20 degrees, and the forecast said it would get even worse. He got inside when the doors opened to a group of elegantly dressed guests. No one noticed the inconspicuous man in the worn coat who slipped past them. For people like him, the invisible inhabitants of the streets, there was only one rule for winter survival: find warmth. And today that warmth meant a few hours of hiding in the luxurious interior of the Philharmonic Hall before security spotted him and threw him out into the freezing cold. The sounds of instruments being tuned came from the distance. Through the half-open door of the concert hall, Marek saw the stage where the National Symphony Orchestra was preparing for its performance. From the program lying on one of the tables, he learned that it was a charity concert organized by the Novak Foundation for Children with Visual Disabilities. He knew he should hide, find some hidden place and wait it out, but something drew him to the music. It had always been like this, though he couldn't explain why. It was as if the notes were speaking to him in a language he understood, but whose origin he could not remember. When the concert began, Marek stood in the darkest corner of the foyer, listening to the music that filtered through the walls. He closed his eyes, letting the sounds wash over him. For a brief moment, he was not homeless. He forgot about hunger and cold. There was only the music and the strange images it evoked in his head. Blurry memories of a piano, elegant halls, a young woman with amber eyes. After about an hour, a break was announced. The doors of the concert hall opened, letting out a crowd of elegantly dressed guests. Women in evening gowns and men in tuxedos filled the foyer, chatting and sipping champagne. Marek squeezed himself even deeper into his corner, knowing that now he would be noticed and asked to leave. However, everyone was too busy with themselves to notice the inconspicuous man in worn-out clothes. That's when he noticed her. A girl, perhaps 12 years old, sat alone at a side table. She wore a simple navy blue dress and held a folded white cane in her hand. Her fair hair was tied in a neat bun, and her face was delicate, almost porcelain. But the most striking thing were her eyes, large, blue, beautiful but absent. They did not follow the movement of the crowd. They stared straight ahead, not focusing on anything in particular. She was blind. Something about her lonely figure moved Mark. He watched as people walked past without noticing her, as if she were invisible. He knew this feeling all too well. He didn't know what tempted him. Maybe it was the music that still rang in his ears, maybe a memory he couldn't capture, or maybe just the sight of a child, just as lonely as he was, though for completely different reasons. Before he knew it, his legs were carrying him towards the girl. "Did you enjoy the concert?" he asked gently in Polish, stopping at a safe distance so as not to scare her. The girl started slightly, and her head turned towards his voice. A cautious smile appeared on her face. "I love Chopin very much," she replied. Her voice was clear and melodic. "I feel every note." Marek felt something tighten in his heart. Her answer seemed strangely familiar to him, as if he had had a similar conversation before. "Me too," he admitted, although he didn't know where this certainty came from. "His music speaks to the soul, doesn't it?" The girl nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. Dad always said." She stopped suddenly and her face grew gloomy. "What did your dad say?" Marek asked, sitting carefully on the chair next to her, even though he knew he shouldn't. Someone could have asked him to leave at any moment. "I don't know," she replied quietly. "I didn't know him. He died before I was born." Mark felt a twinge of sympathy. "I'm sorry," he said sincerely. "Never mind." The girl shrugged with a feigned indifference that was incongruous with her youth. "I am Zofia. By the way, Mark," he answered, though a distant voice in his head suggested a different name. The first notes of Chopin's Polonaise flowed from the speakers, announcing that the intermission was coming to an end. "Oh, I love this song!" Sophia exclaimed, her face lighting up. Marek felt a sudden surge of emotion. His hands trembled, as if they wanted to start dancing on an invisible piano. Zofia hesitated, not believing she was going to say that. "Would you like to dance?" The girl looked at him in surprise. "Me? But I never danced. I don't see it. I'll fall over and embarrass everyone." "You won't fall," Marek assured her with unexpected certainty. "I will guide you. I'll show you how it's done." Zofia hesitated, turning her white staff over in her hands. "I don't know. I will guide your steps. You will guide my soul," Marek said, surprised by his own words that came from some forgotten corner of his mind. These words must have reached the girl because her face lit up with a smile. She put down her cane and extended her hand towards him. "Well then, good." Marek helped her up and carefully led her to a small, empty space next to the tables. He gently placed one of her hands on his shoulder, took the other in his, and placed his other hand lightly on her back. "Now listen to the music," he said quietly. "Don't think about the steps. Let the melody guide you." They began to move slowly, awkwardly. Zofia was tense, uncertain, but Marek guided her with unexpected ease, as if he had done it 1,000 times before. With each passing moment, the girl became more confident and her movements more fluid. "1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. He whispered, helping her find a rhythm. "That's right. You are a very talented dancer, Zofia." The girl smiled brightly, her sightless eyes sparkling with emotion. "It's like flying," she said as they made their first smooth turn. Several guests noticed them and stopped to watch this unusual pair, an unkempt man and an elegant blind girl, dancing with extraordinary grace to the music of Chopin. Some smiled with emotion, others frowned disapprovingly. Mark didn't notice them. In that moment, only the music existed in that strange, inexplicable bond that connected him with the girl. He felt as if he were trying to recall something important through a fog, something that had escaped his memory years ago. Neither of them noticed the woman who had just entered forward. Agnieszka Nowak, CEO of one of the largest medical technology companies in Poland, stopped mid-step. Dressed in an elegant black suit with her hair tied in a strict bun, she exuded authority and confidence. Anyone who knew even a little about the world of Polish business is recognized this woman with her sharp features and piercing amber eyes. Now, however, those eyes widened in shock, and the glass of champagne she held trembled dangerously in her hand. Her eyes were fixed on a couple dancing in the small space between the tables. In her daughter Zofia, who had never danced before, and in the man whose face, despite his overgrown beard and tired features, evoked in her a wave of memories so strong that for a moment she could not breathe. "It's impossible," she whispered, her face turning pale. "Thomas." The glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the marble floor, spilling champagne and scattering shards of glass. The sound of breaking glass cut through the air, causing the dancing couple to stop. Marek looked up and his eyes met Agnieszka's. For a split second, something flashed across his face. A flash of recognition, a flicker of memory, but then it was gone, replaced by fear and confusion. He slowly lowered Zofia's hands. "Sorry," he muttered. "I should go now. Don't go away." Zofia grabbed his hand. "It was my first dance ever. You can't leave now," but Marek was already retreating, aware that everyone was looking at him, that he didn't belong there, that someone would call security any minute. "Sorry," he repeated and moved towards the exit, passing the shocked Agnieszka, who was still standing as if petrified. "Stop him!" The woman's voice cut through the air like a whip. Two men in dark suits standing by the door, immediately moved towards Marek. They grabbed him by the arms as he tried to get to the exit. "Let me go," Marek muttered. "I didn't do anything. I'm leaving now. Mom, what's going on?" Zofia's voice was full of anxiety. The girl stood in the middle of the foyer, disoriented by the sudden commotion. Agnieszka snapped out of her trance and quickly walked towards her daughter. "Everything's okay, honey," she said, putting her arm around Zofia. "Let's go back to the concert." "But what about Marek?" the girl asked, extending her hand toward the sound of the scuffle. "He taught me to dance. It was my first dance." Agnieszka glanced at the man, who now stood motionless, held down by two security guards. In the elegant foyer of the Philharmonic, he looked like an intruder from another world, in a worn coat with tousled graying hair and a few days' stubble. Yet something in his posture, in the way he led her daughter in the dance, in his eyes, which now looked at her with a mixture of fear. And was that even a question? Agnieszka felt her heart speed up. Impossible. Tomasz was dead. He died 15 years ago. And yet, don't take him out, she suddenly said to the security guards. Take him to a private room. But Mrs. Nowak started one of the men. Do as I say. She cut him off firmly. The security guards exchanged surprised glances, but nodded and led the startled Marek toward a side corridor. Mom, what's going on? Zofia tugged on her mother's sleeve. Where are they taking him? Has he done something? Agnieszka looked at her daughter, unsure what to say. How do you explain to a child something she didn't understand? How do you tell Zofia that the man who just taught her to dance disturbingly reminds her of the father she never knew? The father Agnieszka mourned for 15 years? Everything's fine, honey, she finally said, trying to keep her voice normal. I just need to talk to this man. Dr. Wojcik will escort you to your seat in the concert hall. Okay. Appearing as if on cue, an older man and he bowed slightly in his elegant suit. With pleasure, Zofia, he said, offering the girl his arm. But Mom, Zofia began. We'll talk later, Agnieszka promised. Now go back to the concert. As Zofia reluctantly left under Dr. Wojcik's care, Agnieszka took a deep breath and headed toward the corridor, where security guards had taken the mysterious man away. With each step, her heart pounded harder. It couldn't be him. It was impossible. And yet, what if? What if, by some miracle, Tomasz had survived the accident? What if all these years he had lived somewhere without knowing who he was? What if fate had just placed him in her path, leading him across the dance floor, dancing with their blind daughter? Questions swirled in her mind as she opened the door to the private room where a man who could be her long-lost husband was waiting for her. The private room backstage at the National Philharmonic was furnished with elegant simplicity. A few comfortable armchairs, a table with a bottle of water and glasses, discreet lighting, a space reserved for important guests, sponsors, artists, certainly not for the homeless. Marek stood against the wall, feeling uneasy in the luxurious surroundings. His worn coat, mud-stained trousers, and long uncut hair contrasted sharply with the polished surfaces and elegant decor. One of the security guards stood by the door, watching him warily, as if at any moment expecting Marek to flee or try to steal something. May I know what this is all about? Marek asked, trying to keep his voice calm. I've done nothing wrong. The security guard didn't answer, just exchanged a knowing look with his colleague, who was just entering the room. Mrs. Nowak will be here soon, the second man said. Please wait. Marek sighed and leaned against the wall. He wondered if this was how the evening would end. An arrest for trespassing at a private party, maybe even a charge of assaulting a child. He felt bitterness at the thought that his attempt at a good deed to please a lonely child could turn against him. The door opened again, and the woman he had seen earlier entered the room, the one who had called him by a name he didn't recognize. In an elegant black suit, her hair pulled back into a perfect bun, she exuded authority. Her face was pale, and her eyes, those striking amber eyes, stared at him intensely. Leave us alone, she said to the security guards, never taking her eyes off him. Mrs. Nowak, is that it? One of the men began. I said leave us, the woman repeated in a tone that brooked no argument. The security guards exchanged worried glances, but obediently left, closing the door behind them. Silence fell. The woman and the man stood facing each other, separated by an elegant table and 15 years of unknown history. Who are you? The woman finally asked, her voice trembling slightly. Marek Kowalczyk replied, though the very mention of the name seemed strangely empty to him. I didn't want to cause trouble, it's just your daughter. She looked lonely. My daughter, the woman repeated, as if testing the words. Zofia? Yes. Marek nodded. She's a charming little girl, very musical. The woman took a step toward him, never taking her eyes off him. How long have you been living on the streets? She asked suddenly, surprising him with her directness. Marek hesitated. I don't know exactly. 8, maybe 9 years. He finally said, It's hard to say. The days blur together. And before that, the woman pressed, What did you do before you ended up on the streets? Marek felt a familiar feeling of frustration that always appeared when he tried to recall more than a few years back. I don't remember, he admitted reluctantly. I had an accident. At least that's what I was told in the hospital when I woke up. In the hospital? The woman visibly perked up. Which hospital? Marek shrugged. It was a long time ago. I woke up there not remembering who I was. They told me I was found unconscious without any identification. The doctors said something about amnesia. Post-traumatic. I lay there for a while, but when no one was found, he stopped. Well, the system has limited resources for anonymous patients. The woman put her hand to her mouth, as if holding back a cry. And the name Marek, where did you get that? The man laughed softly, humorlessly. One day on the ward, a nurse addressed me as Marek. I was one of many patients. She probably mistook me for someone else, but the name sounded familiar, so I accepted it. Agnieszka Novak felt her knees weaken. She had to sit down in the nearest chair. She breathed shallowly, trying to gather her thoughts. And the name, she asked. Kowalczyk. Marek shrugged. Popular, easy to remember. I needed something when I finally tried to get back on my feet. And you failed? The woman's voice was soft, almost sympathetic. Marek's face hardened. It's hard to find a job when you have no documents, no address, no history. I tried, but sometimes life doesn't work out the way we want it to. The woman stared at him intensely, as if searching his face for something. Do you know music? She said. It wasn't a question. I'm listening. Music. Do you understand it? You feel it. I saw you guiding Zofia. These weren't random movements. Marek felt a strange unease, as if she'd touched something he barely understood himself. I like music, he admitted cautiously. It always speaks to me. I don't know why. Agnieszka reached into her purse and pulled out her smartphone. After a moment of searching, she turned on the recording. The sounds of a piano flowed from the speaker, a complex, virtuoso rendition of Chopin's Nocturne. Marek froze. His eyes widened, and his hands began to move involuntarily in the air, as if playing an invisible keyboard. Do you know this piece? The woman stated, observing his reaction. That's what Marek whispered. Tone Nocturnace Major, Opus 9, Num 2. How do you know that? I don't know, he admitted, frustrated. I just know. The woman turned off the recording and looked at him with a mixture of hope and fear. What if I told you the pianist on that recording was named Tomasz Lewandowski? She asked quietly. Marek frowned. That name began, then shook his head. No, it means nothing to me. What if I told you that Tomasz Lewandowski was my husband? Agnieszka continued, her voice trembling. He died in a car accident 15 years ago. That he was a talented pianist who could dance like no other. Marek looked at her with growing concern. Why are you telling me this? Agnieszka stood up and approached him, standing so close that he could smell the faint scent of her perfume. Because I think you are Tomasz Lewandowski, she said bluntly. My husband, whom I lost 15 years ago, Zofia's father. Marek took a step back, shaking his head. It's impossible, he said firmly. I can't be. Look at me, Agnieszka pleaded. Really look at me. Doesn't she seem familiar to you? Just a little. Marek reluctantly raised his hand, his gaze looking straight into her amber eyes. Something moved in the depths of his mind, like the shadow of a fish swimming beneath the surface of a frozen lake. Blurry, elusive, but undoubtedly present. I hesitated. I don't know. And Zofia? Agnieszka pressed. Did you feel anything when you saw Zofia? Marek fell into thought. Why exactly had he approached this girl? What had drawn him to her, and how had he known exactly how to lead her in the dance, how to adapt the steps to her disability? She was lonely, he finally said. Just like me. Agnieszka sighed deeply and tears welled up in her eyes. Tomasz died in a car accident when I was 6 months pregnant, she said quietly. We were returning from dinner. The taxi we were in collided with a truck. The driver died instantly. I was pulled from the wreckage, but I was unconscious. Tomasz. Her voice broke. Tomasz was presumed dead. His body was apparently burned in the fire that exploded after the accident. Marek listened with growing anxiety. The story was terrible, But it didn't stir up any memories in him. It was someone else's nightmare, not his. I'm sorry for your loss. He said it honestly. But it wasn't me. I'm not Tomasz. An emergency cesarean section was performed at the hospital. Agnieszka continued as if she hadn't heard him. Zofia was born 2 months prematurely. She survived, but her optic nerve was damaged. She had never seen, and I touched the scar on her temple, usually hidden under her hair. I emerged with several scars and a broken heart. Silence fell on the room. The muffled sounds of music drifted from behind the wall. The concert continued as if nothing had happened, as if the world hadn't stopped for two people in a small room backstage. Why are you telling me this? Marek finally asked, feeling strangely shattered. Agnieszka walked to the table and poured herself a glass of water. Her hand was shaking. I don't know, she admitted, taking a sip. A sip. Maybe because for 15 years I lived believing I'd buried my husband, and now I'm standing face to face with a man who looks like him, moves like him, and dances with our daughter exactly as Tomasz always said he would. It must be a coincidence, Marek said, though he didn't sound convinced himself. You can believe in coincidences when they happen once. Agnieszka replied, but as they began to accumulate, she shook her head. Tomasz was a pianist. You recognize Chopin. Tomasz loved to dance. You lead Zofia across the dance floor with extraordinary grace. Tomasz had a unique ability to connect with people. In just a few minutes, you convinced a shy, blind girl to trust you enough to dance with you. Mark felt a sudden headache. Images, blurred, indistinct, yet intense, began to flash before his eyes. A piano, a concert hall, a young woman with amber eyes laughing as he twirled her around. I didn't start, but stopped short, grabbing her head. What's going on? Agnieszka took a step toward him, concerned. Nothing, he mumbled. I just sometimes have these pains, fragments of memories. Maybe I do not know what memories. Agnieszka pressed. What do you see? Marek closed his eyes, trying to capture the images that flitted through his mind like startled birds. The piano said softly, I'm playing. Or at least I think it's me and a young woman dancing while I play. There's laughter. And then he grimaced. And then everything vanished. Agnieszka approached him and gently placed her hand on his shoulder. Despite his disheveled appearance, despite years spent on the streets, she didn't show any signs of reluctance. These could be your memories, she said gently. Fragments of your life before the accident. Marek shook his head. Or maybe my mind just creates images based on what you tell me, he suggested. Agnieszka bit her lip, considering. Finally, she reached into her purse and pulled out her wallet. From a small compartment, she pulled out a yellowed photo. Look, she said, handing him the photograph. Marek glanced at the photo and froze. It showed a young, smiling couple, a woman with amber eyes he recognized as Agnieszka's, and a man. A man who looked like a younger, healthier version of himself, beardless, with shorter hair, a twinkle in his eye and a confident expression, but without a doubt. It was his face. He started to say it, but the words caught in his throat. This is our wedding photo, Agnieszka said quietly. Mine and Tomasz. From 17 years ago, Marek stared at the photo, feeling his world begin to spin. If this is true, if he really is Tomasz Lewandowski, then he has a wife, a daughter, a past, an identity, a life. But how is this possible? How could he not remember something so fundamental? I have to, he began, handing the photo back to her with a trembling hand. I have to get out of here. It's too much. I can't. I understand, Agnieszka said, though disappointment was evident in her voice. But please don't disappear. No, give us another chance. A chance. Give yourself a chance to discover the truth. Marek looked at her, unsure of what to do. On the one hand, everything inside him screamed to escape, to return to his familiar life on the street, where things were simple yet difficult. On the other, what if it was true? What if he had lived for years as someone else, unaware of his true identity? Zofia, he said suddenly. She doesn't know, does she? Agnieszka shook her head. No, to her, you're just a stranger who taught her to dance. A kind man who noticed a lonely child. Marek nodded, feeling a strange sense of relief. He wasn't ready to meet the girl as her father. The very thought seemed absurd to him. I want to at least thank her. He said, "For the dance," and apologized for disappearing so suddenly. Agnieszka hesitated, but finally nodded. "The concert should be over soon," she said, glancing at her watch. "We can wait for Zofia here." At that moment, there was a knock on the door. Agnieszka raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Come in," she said. The door opened, and an elegant older man in a suit entered the room, the same one who had seen Zofia off earlier. "Agnieszka, I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, casting a puzzled glance at Marek, "but Zofia isn't feeling well. She asked me to bring you." Agnieszka immediately became serious. "What happened?" she asked, reaching for her bag. "She has a severe headache," the man explained. "You know how it is with her migraines. It started suddenly. I'm going to her," Agnieszka said, moving toward the door. But she stopped after a few steps and looked back at Marek. "Will you come with me?" Marek hesitated. Part of him wanted to use these opportunities to slip away and disappear into the night streets of Warsaw, to return to the life he knew, however difficult it might be. But in another part, the part awakened by the dance with the girl and the encounter with the woman with amber eyes, wanted to know the truth. "Okay," he finally said, approaching the door. The man in the suit was watching him with unconcealed concern. Curiosity. Janusz Wojcik introduced himself, extending his hand. "I'm a family friend and Zofia's doctor." Marek responded automatically, shaking his hand. He was about to add Kowalczyk, but hesitated. Is that really his name? And if not, who exactly is he? As they walked down the corridor toward the concert hall, Marek felt as if he were teetering on the edge of a precipice. Just a few hours ago, he'd been simply a homeless man seeking shelter from the cold. Now someone was suggesting he might be the father of a blind girl and the husband of one of the most powerful businesswomen in Poland. It sounded like a fairy tale, like a fantasy, like something that happened to other people, not him. But the images in his head, the piano, the dancing, the laughter, the woman with the amber eyes, were beginning to form a story that seemed strangely familiar, as if he were listening to a story he'd once known but forgotten. Or perhaps it was his own story, the story of Tomasz Lewandowski, a man who died 15 years ago. Or perhaps he hadn't died after all. Zofia sat on a chair in the small artist's room, her head resting on her hands. Her face was pale and beads of sweat were beading on her forehead. A white cane lay on the table beside her. "Mom, is that you?" she asked when she heard the door open. "Yes, honey, I am," Agnieszka replied, immediately approaching her daughter and placing her hand on her forehead. "Migraine again." Zofia nodded slightly, wincing in pain. "It came suddenly, as if someone had turned on a light in my head." Agnieszka looked questioningly at Dr. Wojcik, who had followed her into the room. "I gave her the medication," he said quietly. "It should work within half an hour." Marek paused uncertainly in the doorway, unsure if he should enter. The sight of the suffering girl gripped his heart. If he really was her father, no, he couldn't think like that yet. It was too surreal. "Who else is there?" Zofia asked suddenly, lifting her head. "I hear someone breathing." Agnieszka. She hesitated, looking at Marek. Her eyes were filled with the question of whether he was ready. "That's a friend," she finally said. "The man who taught you to dance." Zofia's face immediately brightened despite the pain. Marek asked hopefully, "Didn't you go?" The man felt something soften inside him. The girl remembered his name. He didn't answer as he entered the room. "I wanted to make sure you were okay. I just have a stupid migraine," Zofia said, trying to smile. "I've had them since birth. The doctors say it was an accident." Marek moved closer, feeling Agnieszka's intense gaze on him. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said honestly. "But you danced brilliantly despite everything." Zofia's cheeks turned slightly pink. "I really didn't fall down even once." Marek confirmed with a smile. "You're a natural dancer. It's in your blood." The words hung in the air, taking on unexpected meaning. Agnieszka held her breath, and Dr. Wojcik looked at her questioningly. Only Zofia, unaware tension, she smiled broadly. "It's because you guided me well," my mom said. "She says my dad was a great dancer too. Maybe someday you'll teach me more steps." Marek felt his heart speed up. He looked at Agnieszka, who was watching him with a mixture of hope and fear. He heard his own voice with pleasure, though he couldn't remember when he decided to answer. "If your mom agrees." Agnieszka gently brushed the hair away from Zofia's forehead. We'll see, honey, she said gently. You have to feel better first. Zofia sighed in frustration. It's always the same. I hate being choked. Rah, nobody likes that. Mark agreed. But you know what helps? Focusing on something pleasant, such as music. Do you like music? Zofia asked, clearly interested. Mark hesitated. Did he like music? According to Agnieszka, he was once a pianist, someone who not only liked music but lived it. But what did he feel? Yes, he finally admitted it. Music has always been important to me. It helps me think, feel, remember. Zofia told me too, enthusiastically, ignoring her headache. My mother says that when I was little, only music could calm me down. Especially Chopin. Nocturne Esder, Marek asked before he could think. Zofia raised her eyebrows in surprise. How did you know? This is my favorite. My mom always played it when I had nightmares. Mark felt the room spinning around him. How did he know? It was the same song that Agnieszka had played for him in the other room. But how did he know that this was the song that soothed Zofia? Was it an accident? Does your mother play the piano? He asked, trying to hide the tremor in his voice. Agnieszka and Zofia exchanged a strange look. The girl did not answer. Mom just turns on the recordings. It was my dad who played the piano. My mom has all his recordings. Marek looked at Agnieszka, who looked as if she was about to cry. Sorry, he muttered. I shouldn't have asked. Nothing happened, Agnieszka assured him, though her voice was strained. That's a good question. Dr. Wojcik cleared his throat, breaking the awkward silence. I think we should let Zofia rest, he said. The medications should work soon. I don't want to rest, Zofia protested. I want to talk to Mark. No one ever taught me how to dance. Everyone is always afraid that I will fall or break something. The girl's words touched Mark more deeply than he expected. Didn't he feel the same way as a homeless person? As if everyone was afraid of him, avoided him, didn't want to touch him? We'll have plenty of time to talk, he said gently. Now you need to feel better. Do you promise, Zofia pressed? Do you promise not to disappear? Her voice was so sincere, so full of hope, that Marek felt a twinge of guilt. Just an hour ago, he had been considering disappearing, returning to the streets and becoming anonymous. But now, looking at this girl, at her fair hair so similar to his own, at her sightless eyes that yet seemed to see straight into his soul, he couldn't imagine never seeing her again. I promise, he said, and the words seemed to have the weight of an oath. Zofia smiled with relief, then grimaced as the headache returned. I'll walk you home, said Agnieszka, helping her daughter get up. Dr. Wojcik will come with us. And Marek? Zofia asked immediately. Agnieszka looked at the man with an unreadable expression on her face. Mr. Marek probably has his own plans, she said carefully. Marek thought about his plans, trying to find shelter for the night. Maybe he could get to the shelter on Wolska Street if he hurried, or he could return to his makeshift shelter under the Poniatowski Bridge, where he had left his backpack with a few valuables. None of this suddenly seemed important. He actually said slowly, I don't have any specific plans. Agnieszka stared at him for a moment, as if trying to read his thoughts. Finally, she made a decision. Then maybe you would like to come with us, she suggested. We have a lot to discuss. Yes, Zofia exclaimed, and then immediately regretted it, clutching her head. Sorry, she muttered, too loud. Dr. Wojcik patted the girl gently on the shoulder. The medications are starting to work, but you need some peace and rest, he said. He looked at Marek with curiosity in his eyes. Will you come with us too? That was Marek's answer, surprised by his own decision. If it's not a problem, no problem, Agnieszka assured him, though her voice betrayed how complicated the situation was. My car was waiting for us at the entrance. As they left the Philharmonic Hall, Marek was aware of the stares they were attracting. An elegant, refined woman in a black suit, leading a blind girl, and next to them, an unshaven homeless man in a worn coat. They must have looked like figures in a surrealist painting. Snow was still falling outside, and the frost bit his face. Marek instinctively shivered. He knew that feeling all too well. Cold nights were his worst enemy. But before he could consider a warmer place to sleep, a luxurious black car with tinted windows pulled up in front of them. The driver in uniform jumped out to open the door for them. Mrs. Novak. He greeted Agnieszka respectfully, then his gaze settled on Marek. A look of surprise flashed across his face, quickly replaced by professional indifference. "Thank you, Antoni," Agnieszka said. "We're going home. You'll come with us," she added, pointing to Marek. The driver nodded, though questions were evident in his eyes. Zofia got in first, then Agnieszka, and finally, after a moment's hesitation, Marek. Dr. Wojcik took the front seat next to the driver. The car's interior was luxurious, warm, and smelled of leather. For a man who had spent years on the streets, it was like entering another world. Marek sat stiffly, afraid to touch anything, aware of the contrast between his dirty clothes and the elegant interior. "Relax," Agnieszka said quietly, noticing his tension. "This is just the car for you." He replied equally quietly so that Zofia wouldn't hear. "For me, it's like something from another world." Agnieszka bit her lip, clearly agitated. "If what I suspect is true," she whispered, "then this world was once your world too." Marek didn't answer. He didn't know what to say. Could he really be Tomasz Lewandowski, the husband of this elegant woman, the father of this girl, someone who had a home, a family, a career? It seemed impossible. Yet the car moved smoothly, entering the snow-covered streets of Warsaw. Zofia, tired from the migraine and the medication, rested her head on her mother's shoulder and quickly fell asleep. Agnieszka embraced her gently, stroking her fair hair. "He has your hair," she said suddenly to Mark, looking at him over her daughter's head. "I've always talked about this. Tomasz had exactly that shade of blonde." Marek involuntarily touched his hair, now long, graying and matted. It was hard to compare them to Zofia's light, silky hair. "Have you seen the photo?" Agnieszka continued. "You can't deny the resemblance." "I don't deny it," admitted Marek. "But physical resemblance doesn't mean I am him. Maybe it's just a coincidence." "And the music?" Agnieszka pressed. "Dance. Is this also a coincidence?" Marek looked out the window at the flashing city lights. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I really don't know who I am. For years I accepted this. I lived from day to day without thinking about the past. But now Agnieszka leaned slightly towards him. "Now everything has changed," Marek finished. "I met you and Zofia. I heard a story that could have been my story. I saw a photo of someone who looks like me, and for the first time in years I want to know. I want to remember." Agnieszka smiled gently, and tears glistened in her eyes. "I will help you," she said quietly. "We will find the truth together." They spent the rest of the journey in silence, each immersed in their own thoughts. Marek watched from the window the elegant neighborhoods they passed through. Finally, the car turned onto a side street and stopped in front of a modern, tall building made of glass and steel. "We are here," Agnieszka said, gently waking Zofia. "Honey, we've arrived home." Zofia blinked sleepily, confused. Mom asked, "Where are we?" "At home, honey. How do you feel?" "Better," the girl replied, rubbing her eyes. "The pain is almost gone. That's good." Agnieszka smiled with relief. "Let's go inside. It's late." The driver opened the door for them, helping them get out. Dr. Wojcik also got out and approached Agnieszka. "I'll call you tomorrow to check how I'm feeling," he said, glancing at Zofia and then at Marek. "And I am available if you need consultation on any other matter." Agnieszka nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Janusz. I don't know what I would do without you." The doctor shook her hand, bowed slightly to Zofia, and nodded to Marek, then walked away towards the car parked nearby. Marek stood on the sidewalk, unsure what to do. The building in front of him screamed luxury and inaccessibility. It was no place for someone like him, but he promised Zofia he would not disappear. "Come on," said Agnieszka, as if reading his thoughts. "We have a guest room. You can take a bath, eat something warm, and rest. We'll discuss everything tomorrow." "I don't know if this is a good idea," Mark began. "Where are you going, Marek?" Zofia asked suddenly, hearing his voice a little further away than she expected. The man hesitated. "I'm not sure if I should." "You promised," the girl reminded him. "You promised you wouldn't disappear." These words were like a hook thrown over his conscience. How could he fail this child? Even if he wasn't her father, and he still wasn't sure about that, he had made a promise. "You're right," he admitted as he came closer. "I promised." Zofia smiled with relief, extending her hand towards him. After a moment of hesitation, Marek took it. Her little hand was warm and trusting in his large, rough hands. Agnieszka watched this exchange with a mixture of hope and fear, as if she were teetering on the edge of a precipice, not knowing whether she was about to fall or experience something completely unexpected. "Let's go inside," she said finally. "It's cold." They entered the building where an elegant doorman greeted Agnieszka and Zofia with a nod. His gaze stopped on Mark for a moment, but one look from Agnieszka was enough to stop him from asking questions. The elevator took them to the top floor. When the door opened, Marek saw a spacious hallway leading to a single door. Penthouse, of course. Agnieszka opened the door and let Zofia go first. The girl entered confidently, moving from memory through the well-known space. "Please," Agnieszka said to Marek, gesturing for him to come inside. The man crossed the threshold with the feeling as if he were entering an alien world. And indeed, the interior of the apartment was like something from another planet. Spacious, tastefully decorated, full of works of art and elegant furniture. Huge floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a panorama of Warsaw at night, twinkling with thousands of lights. "I think you need a hot bath," Agnieszka said, closing the door and taking clean clothes. "I have some of Tomasz's things." She hesitated. "I mean, I kept, not which of his things should fit." Mark felt a strange shiver at the thought of putting on the clothes of the man he might have been. It was surreal. "Thank you," he said, not knowing what else to say. "Mom, I'm tired." Zofia spoke up, rubbing her eyes. "Can I go to sleep now?" "Of course, honey," replied Agnieszka, approaching her daughter. "I'll walk you home, and Marek will be here when I wake up." The girl made sure of it. Marek hesitated, then said, "I'll be here, Zofia, I promise." The girl smiled happily. "Good night, Marek. Thank you for the dance. It was the best evening of my life." These simple words hit Mark straight in the heart. How could he have such a profound impact on this girl's life in such a short time? Was it possible that some bond, deeper than reason, deeper than memory, truly united them? "Good night, Zofia," he replied quietly. It was also a special evening for me. Agnieszka took her daughter to her room, leaving Marek alone in the huge living room. The man stood still, afraid to touch anything, feeling like an intruder in this elegant world. His gaze fell on the piano standing in the corner of the living room, a beautiful, black, shiny instrument that seemed to attract him like a magnet. Without realizing what he was doing, he stepped closer. His fingers, rough and cracked from the cold, hovered over the keyboard. Has he ever played such an instrument? Did his fingers remember dancing across the black and white keys? Did the music that sometimes played in his head come from a part of his life he didn't remember? Carefully, as if afraid the instrument might bite him, he pressed one key. A pure, crystalline sound filled the room, and then, as if guided by something beyond his awareness, his fingers began to move, first stumbling, uncertainly, then increasingly smoothly finding the melody his mind had forgotten. But the body remembered. Nocturne Esder, Opus 9, No. 2. Chopin, a lullaby that soothed Zofia, music that connected him to a past he couldn't remember. He was so absorbed in the game that he didn't notice Agnieszka, who had returned to the living room and was now leaning against the doorframe with her hand to her mouth and tears streaming down her face. "Thomas," she whispered, "it's really you." The sound of the piano stopped abruptly as Marek heard a soft sob coming from behind him, and he turned sharply to see Agnieszka standing in the doorway. Her hands pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "Sorry," he said, immediately moving away from the instrument. "I shouldn't have," she interrupted him, stepping closer. "Please keep playing." Mark hesitated, uncertain and confused. It was a strange feeling. His fingers remembered how to play, even if his mind didn't, as if the music was recorded not in his memory, but in his muscles, bones, and blood. "I don't know how I do it," he admitted quietly. "The same thing just happens." Agnieszka stood next to the piano, looking at it with a mixture of hope and disbelief. "You played exactly the same way 15 years ago." She said it with the same expression, the same nuances. "It was your interpretation unlike any other, and it is still you." Marek looked at his hands, large, rough, with cracked skin and broken nails. They didn't look like the hands of a pianist. "Agnieszka," he began carefully, using her name for the first time. "Even if the resemblance is striking, even if I am able to play this melody, it does not mean that I am him, that I am Tomasz." The woman sat on the edge of the piano bench close to him, but not touching him. I know, she said quietly. It all seems impossible, but I saw you with Zofia. I heard you playing. I saw your face when you listened to the music. She hesitated. There are things you can't fake, things that are encoded in the soul. They sat in silence for a long moment, listening to the silence that fell after the broken sounds of Nocturne. I have a proposition. Agnieszka finally said, stay here for a few days. Allow yourself to rest, sleep, and eat proper meals. Let's try to find the answers together. If it turns out you're not Tomasz, that it's just an incredible coincidence, well, at least you'll have a roof over your head on the coldest days of this winter. And if her voice did shake, if there was even the slightest chance that you were him, she didn't finish, but she didn't have to. Her eyes, full of unexpressed emotions, spoke louder than words. Mark considered her proposal. Common sense told him he should leave. This situation was too strange, too improbable. But something else, something deeper, made him stay. Maybe it was a hope of discovering the truth about myself. Perhaps the need to feel warmth and safety after years spent on the streets. Or maybe, just maybe, it was that little girl with the white cane whose smile broke through the armor he had built around himself over the years. Okay, he agreed. I'll end up staying for a few days. Agnieszka breathed a sigh of relief, as if she had been holding her breath the whole time. Thank you, she simply said. She got up from the bench and gestured towards the corridor. Come, I'll show you the guest room and bathroom. You must be tired. Marek followed her through the elegant apartment. Every inch of space exuded luxury, but not ostentatious, rather tasteful and subtle. The walls were decorated with paintings, mainly abstractions and atmospheric landscapes. On one of the shelves stood a collection of crystal sculptures. Everything was kept in subdued, warm colors. Agnieszka stopped at the door at the end of the corridor. This is the guest room, she said, opening the door. The bathroom is on the right. You will find everything you need there. Towels, toothbrush, shaving kit. Marek walked inside, looking around in disbelief. The room was larger than all the places he had slept in over the years combined. Large, comfortable bed, soft carpet, elegant furniture. The window offered a view of Warsaw at night. This is too much, he said, feeling awkward. Agnieszka smiled slightly. If you are really Tomasz, then after 15 years on the street, it is still not enough, she said. She went to the wardrobe and opened at it. Here are the clothes. As I mentioned, I kept some things. Tomasz should fit. Marek went to the wardrobe and touched one of the clothes hanging there. An elegant shirt, a soft sweater, trousers made of good material, the clothes of someone he was not, or someone he did not remember being. Thank you, he said quietly. Agnieszka backed toward the door. The kitchen is at the end of the corridor on the left, she informed him. Help yourself to whatever you want. And she hesitated. Good night, Mark, or whoever you are. When she left, closing the door behind her, Marek fell heavily onto the bed. The entire evening, from the moment he slipped into the Philharmonic Hall, seeking shelter from the cold, had seemed like a dream, an unrealistic, absurd dream from which he would soon wake up, only to find himself back on a cold park bench or under a bridge. But the sheets beneath his hands were real. The warmth surrounding him in the room was real, and that strange, unexplained feeling in his chest. This mixture of fear, hope, and longing for something he couldn't name, that too was real. Slowly, with almost religious reverence, he removed his worn coat and the rest of his dirty clothes. He entered the bathroom, which turned out to be as luxurious as the rest of the apartment. Marble surfaces, huge shower, large bathtub. He looked at his reflection in the mirror and froze. The man who looked at him from the mirror was a stranger. Long, tangled hair, gray, unkempt beard, sunken cheeks, tired eyes. How could this man be the elegant pianist in the photo, the husband of an elegant, successful businesswoman, and the father of a charming little girl? It seemed impossible. And yet, if you looked more closely, if you pushed aside the outward signs of neglect and poverty, something about the shape of the eyes, the line of the jaw, the set of the eyebrows, something seemed to belong in this photo. Shaking his head to clear away the strange thoughts, Marek stepped into the shower. Hot water was a luxury he hadn't experienced in months. He stood under the stream for long minutes, letting the water wash away the dirt, sweat, and fatigue. The shampoo I found on the shelf smelled expensive and pleasant. He lathered his body, feeling the tension slowly leave him. When he finally emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in a soft towel, he felt like a newborn. He found clean clothes on the bed, simple pajamas that Agnieszka must have delivered while he was in the shower. He put it on, enjoying the feel of clean cotton against clean skin. Even though he was emotionally and physically exhausted, he knew he wouldn't fall asleep right away. Too many thoughts were swirling in his head. He walked over to the window and looked out at Warsaw at night, wondering how many times he had stood under a window like that, looking down and wishing for warmth and safety, and now he was inside on the other side of the glass. But did he really belong here? A gentle knock on the door snapped him out of his thoughts. "Please," he said quietly. The door opened and Agnieszka stood there. She changed her elegant suit for a simple house dress. Without makeup, with her hair tied in a loose knot, she looked younger and more vulnerable. "Sorry to interrupt," she said. "I thought you might be hungry." Only now did Marek notice that he was holding trays of food, sandwiches, a bowl of soup, a cup of tea. "You didn't have to," he said, but his loudly growling stomach immediately contradicted him. Agnieszka smiled upon hearing this. "I see that I had to," she said, entering the room and placing the tray on a small table by the window. It was nothing fancy, but at this hour she shrugged. "That's more than I've eaten in days," Marek admitted honestly, sitting down at the table. Agnieszka pulled up another chair and sat down opposite him. She watched him eat slowly for a moment, with a dignity that seemed out of place for someone who had lived on the streets for years. "Can I ask you something?" She finally spoke up. Marek nodded, swallowing a bite of sandwich. "How did you end up on the street? What happened after the accident?" The man put down his sandwich and took a sip of tea, collecting his thoughts. "I remember little from that period," he admitted. "The first clear memory is of the hospital. White walls, the smell of disinfectants, the beeping of monitors. They told me I was found unconscious and without any documents. I had serious head injuries, concussion, broken ribs. I didn't remember who I was, what my name was, where I came from." Agnieszka listened intently, not taking her eyes off him. "Doctors called it post-traumatic amnesia. They said that memories might come back, but they might as well never come back. They waited for someone to look for me, but no one came." "I was looking for it," Agnieszka said quietly, and there was bitterness in her voice. "But I was told that you died in an accident, that your body was identified by personal effects," and she stopped. My God, how could they make such a mistake? Mark shook his head. "I don't know, maybe it was a different hospital. Maybe some admin confusion. Systems are not perfect. It's not a mess," she said bitterly. "This is a shameful mistake that cost us 15 years. Mark didn't know what to answer. If he really was Tomasz, then she was right. Someone robbed them of the chance to live together, to raise their daughter together, to have everything they could have had. "What happened next?" Agnieszka asked after a while, trying to control her emotions. "After a few weeks, they discharged me," Marek continued. "No documents, no identity, no insurance. The system is not prepared for such cases. I ended up in a homeless shelter. I tried to get back on my feet, find a job, but without documents, without history, without references." He shrugged. "It wasn't easy, but you were. You are an educated man." Agnieszka noticed, "You know the music. You can play the piano. These are not the skills of the average person." "Yes, it's true," Mark agreed. "But when you don't have documents confirming your education, when you don't remember where you studied, when you can't give the names of your teachers or professors, no one trusts you. I tried to play on the street in the underpasses," but he smiled sadly. "It's hard to play Chopin when you don't have a piano." Agnieszka looked as if her heart was breaking. "I earned a little here and there by taking on small jobs," Mark continued, "but there was always something happening. I started drinking to forget the nightmares that haunted me. I lost my job. I lost my apartment. I went back to the streets. I tried to get new documents, but without anything to prove my identity, it was almost impossible. And so several years passed. Eventually, I just gave up." "But you survived," said Agnieszka, "for 15 years on the street. This requires incredible strength." Mark looked at her in surprise. He had expected to hear admiration in her voice. I never thought about it that way. He admitted, I just lived from day to day. There were better days when someone was generous or when I found a safe place to sleep. And there were worse days when I had nothing to eat or when the temperature dropped so low that I wondered if I would survive until morning. Agnieszka reached out and gently touched his hand. But you lived to see it, she said quietly, and now you are here. Her touch was warm and soft, so different from anything he had experienced in recent years. Mark fought the impulse to turn his hand and take hers, to seek more of that warmth, more of that human connection he longed for, even if he didn't realize it. If you are really Tomasz, Agnieszka continued, then I have been looking for you in all the wrong places for years. I clung to the memory of the man I knew, instead of searching for you as you could have become. You couldn't have known, said Mark gently. You believed what you were told. Anyone would do that. Agnieszka looked up, tears glistening in her eyes. What if you're not him? She asked suddenly. What if it was all just an incredible coincidence? A similarity, a musical talent, a special connection with Zofia. Mark thought deeply about her question. I don't know, he finally admitted it. Honestly, I don't know what I'm more afraid of. That it will turn out that I am Tomasz, and I lost 15 years of my life with you and Zofia, or that I am not him, and it is all just a cruel joke of fate. Agnieszka stared at him intensely, as if trying to peer into the depths of his soul. I'll call Janusz tomorrow, she finally said. Dr. Wojcik, do you remember him? He is not only Zofia's doctor, but also an outstanding neurologist. He specializes in memory disorders. Maybe he doesn't. Mark interrupted her unexpectedly firmly, at least not right away. Why? She asked, surprised. Mark hesitated, searching for words to explain his feelings. If all this is true, he said slowly, if I am really Tomasz, your husband, Zofia's father, then I want to first get to know both of you as the people you are now, not just as characters from a story I might have forgotten. And I want you to know me as I am now, not just as a memory of the man you loved 15 years ago. Sodom 15. Agnieszka looked at him with a mixture of surprise and recognition. That makes sense, she admitted. But how do you want to do it? Give me a few days, he asked. Let me spend time with Zofia, get to know her, get to know you before we start looking for medical explanations, before we start the whole machine of tests and research. Let's just be together. Maybe I will remember something naturally. Maybe something will act as a trigger for my memory. Agnieszka considered his request, biting her lip. What about Zofia? She finally asked. What will we tell her? That you're potentially her father who came back from the dead? Mark shook his head. No, that would be too much for her. Maybe for now I'm just a friend, a person you met who needs help. It wouldn't even be a lie. What if it turns out you're not Tomasz? Agnieszka asked quietly. How do I explain this to Zofi? She's already attached to you. Then I will tell her the truth. Marek replied that although I was not her father, I was glad that I could meet her and that our friendship was important to me, and that I won't disappear from her life if I don't want to. Agnieszka smiled slightly. You sound like him, she said quietly. Like Thomas. He always thought of others first, of their feelings, of what was best for them. Mark didn't know how to answer that. Was this further evidence? Is it just a coincidence? Could personality survive even when memory was lost? Okay, Agnieszka finally agreed. Let's do as you propose. A few days to get to know each other better, without pressure, without expectations, and then we'll see. She got up from the table, taking the now empty tray. You must be exhausted, she said. I should rest too. Tomorrow. Well, tomorrow will be a new day. Thank you, Marek said, also standing up for everything. For food, for a warm place to sleep, for trust. Agnieszka looked at him with an inscrutable expression. I don't know if it's trust or madness. She admitted it, but something tells me it was the right decision. For a moment, they stood facing each other, separated by 15 years of absence and the secrets that still lingered between them. And yet, despite these barriers, something connected them. Something deeper than words, deeper even than memories. Good night, Mark, Agnieszka finally said, moving it towards the door. Good night, Agnieszka, he replied, watching her leave and close the door behind her. When he was alone, he went to the bed and collapsed onto it, feeling the exhaustion of this extraordinary day finally catching up with him. His last thought before he fell asleep was the question that had been on his mind since he heard Agnieszka's story. If he really is Tomasz Lewandowski, will he ever regain the memories of the life he lost? And can he love again the family he forgot? He didn't know the answer, but for the first time in years, he fell asleep with the feeling that maybe his life had some purpose, some direction. That maybe after all these years of being lost, he had finally found his way home, even if he didn't yet remember that this was his home. 6 months later, the National Philharmonic was once again filled with elegantly dressed guests. This time, however, the event had a different character. This was not just another of the Novak Foundation's charitable endeavors, but also a symbol of a new beginning. Backstage in a small room, Tomasz Lewandowski, no longer Marek Kowalczyk, looked in the mirror and adjusted the bow tie on his tuxedo. His reflection was almost unrecognizable compared to the man who had entered the Philharmonic Hall seeking shelter from the cold 6 months earlier. Close-cropped hair, neatly trimmed beard, healthy skin tone, regained weight. But the biggest change was in his eyes. Instead of emptiness and resignation, a spark of life now burned within them. "Are you nervous?" Agnieszka's voice came from the door. She stood there in an elegant, dark blue dress with her hair tied in a classic bun, but her eyes full of warmth were the same as always. "A little," he admitted with a smile. "I haven't played publicly since, well, I don't really remember since when. 15 years and months," she replied, coming closer. "And you were wonderful." Tomasz turned away from the mirror and took her hands. "I still don't remember everything," he said quietly. "There are whole parts of my life, our life, that are still like a blank page, but you remember enough." Agnieszka replied, gently touching his cheek. "Enough to know who you are to find your way home." It was true. During these 6 months under the care of Dr. Wojcik and a specialized team of neurologists, memories began to return. Not all at once, not in an orderly manner, more like pieces of a puzzle slowly assembling a picture of his past. He already remembered his childhood in a small town near Krakow, memories from the Academy of Music, the first meeting with Agnieszka at a concert in Krakow where he played as a final-year student, their wedding in a small historic church. The shared apartment, initially modest, then increasingly comfortable as Agnieszka's business career gained momentum and his own in the world of music developed promisingly. He remembered the moment when Agnieszka told him she was pregnant. They were sitting on the balcony of their new apartment, drinking their morning coffee. He remembered placing his hands on her growing belly, feeling the kicks of her unborn child. And then there was darkness. The accident remained the most elusive memory, just a flash of lights, the screech of toys, a feeling like the world was turning over, and then nothing, until I found myself wallowing in a hospital with no memories, no identity. "Dad," Sophie's voice interrupted his thoughts. She stood in the doorway, beautiful in her simple blue dress, with a white cane in her hand. "It's almost time." Tomasz smiled when he heard the word, "Dad." It still sounded so new, so fresh to his ears. Zofia only started calling him that 2 months ago, when DNA testing confirmed what their hearts already knew, that the homeless man who taught her to dance was indeed her father. "I'm coming, princess," he responded by extending his hand towards her. Zofia walked up to him confidently. Over the months, they developed a communication and mobility system that allowed her to feel safe while maintaining her independence. Tomasz never forced his help on her. He waited for her to ask for it. "I'm nervous," she admitted as she shook his hand. "What if I make a mistake? Then I will be wrong too," he replied with a smile, "and we'll make a new melody out of it." Zofia laughed, and her face, usually serious and focused, brightened. "Are you ready?" Agnieszka asked, approaching them and forming a family trio. "That's what Zofia replied. We both are." As they walked down the corridor towards the stage, Tomasz felt his heart fill with gratitude. 6 months ago, he was nobody. Homeless, without past, without future, without hope. And now he was on his way with his wife and daughter to play a concert in front of a packed hall. The road to this point has not been easy. When Agnieszka finally invited Dr. Wojcik to examine Marek, the diagnosis was clear: post-traumatic amnesia, likely caused by an accident 15 years earlier. The DNA test confirmed what they already suspected. Marek Kowalczyk was actually Tomasz Lewandowski, Agnieszka's husband and Zofia's father. But that was just the beginning. Discovering the truth began a long, difficult process of recovering memories, rebuilding relationships, and above all, returning to life. There were therapies, medications, hypnosis sessions. There were moments of frustration when memories would not come back. There were moments of breakdown when Tomasz asked himself if he really deserved this second chance. Agnieszka was with him throughout this time, patient and supportive, but also honest. "I don't expect you to be the same man I lost 15 years ago," she told him once. "We have both changed. We are different people, but maybe we can get to know each other again and love each other again." And indeed it happened. The love they thought they had lost was reborn. Different, more mature, deeper, built not only on memories that were slowly returning, but above all on the shared experience of these last months, on getting to know each other again, on small, everyday gestures of care and understanding. And Zofia was a miracle that Tomasz discovered every day. Her sensitivity, her wisdom, her extraordinary musical talent. All this made his heart swell with pride. He taught her to play the piano, and she taught him to listen to music in a new way. Not only with your ears, but with your whole body, with all your senses. Together they discovered a world of sounds that did not need light. As they entered the backstage area, they saw a beautiful black grand piano waiting for them in the center. Next to it stood a second, smaller instrument. The plan was simple. First, Tomasz will play solo, then Zofia will join him to perform a duet specially prepared for this occasion. "We can do it," Agnieszka said quietly, squeezing her husband's hand. "Remember, this is not an exam, it's a celebration." Tomasz nodded, feeling adrenaline start to flow through his veins. That night was a symbol not only of his return to music, but of his return to life. And although he didn't remember everything yet, although he might never regain some memories, the most important thing was that he felt whole again. He was Tomasz Lewandowski again, husband, father, musician. The announcer announced it, and applause filled the hall. Tomasz kissed Agnieszka on the cheek, shook Zofia's hand, and went on stage, bowing to the audience. The National Philharmonic Hall looked exactly as he remembered. Elegant, with perfect acoustics, filled with people in their best clothes. But this time they were not anonymous listeners to him. Agnieszka sat in the front row, beautiful and proud. Next to her, a seat was waiting for Zofia, who would join him later. And around them were friends, new and old, who supported him through these months of rebuilding his life. He even spotted a few familiar faces from the homeless shelter on Wolska Street, where he spent many winter nights. They were invited as honorary guests, part of a project the Novak Foundation started after Tomasz was found. A project that aimed to help people like he was 6 months ago. Lost, homeless, deprived of any chance for a better life. Tomasz sat down at the piano, took a deep breath, and let his fingers touch the keys. For a moment there was absolute silence, and then the first notes of Chopin's Nocturne, the same one that had once calmed little Zofia, filled the hall. While playing, Tomasz felt the music flowing through him, becoming a bridge connecting his past with the present. Every note was both a memory and a promise. A memory of who he was and a promise of who he might yet become. When he finished the first song, the applause was deafening. Tomasz smiled, bowing slightly, and then looked towards the wings where Zofia was waiting. He nodded and she walked onto the stage, moving with the grace they had honed over countless rehearsals. The audience fell silent as they watched the blind girl confidently walk to the second piano, her father gently touching her shoulder, making sure she was in the right position. "Ready?" he asked quietly. "Ready?" she replied with a smile, and they started playing. Father and daughter, 2 pianos, 4 hands dancing across the keys in perfect synchronization. The melody they created, especially for this occasion, combined classical elements with a touch of modernity. It was both a tribute to tradition and a look into the future. While playing, Tomasz would sometimes look at Zofia, at her focused face, at her hands moving with precision and feeling, at that extraordinary sensitivity that allowed her to feel the music in a way that most sighted people would never experience. He felt his heart fill with pride and a love so strong it was almost painful. When they finished, the room exploded with applause. People stood up, clapping and cheering. Tomasz walked up to Zofia, put his arm around her, and together they bowed to the audience. Then he gestured for Agnieszka to join them on stage. As the three of them stood there, holding hands, Tomasz knew that this moment would stay with him forever, even if his memory failed him again, even if all his other memories were to fade away again. Because it wasn't just a story about regained memory, it was a story about rediscovering what is most important. Love, family, music that moves the soul. A story about how even after years of darkness, after years of living on the margins of society, you can find your way back to the light. As they left the stage, Tomasz noticed Zofia wiping away a tear. "Why are you crying, princess?" he asked quietly. "Because I'm happy," she replied simply. "All my life I have felt that something was missing, that there was an empty space inside me that I could not fill. And now I feel complete." Tomasz embraced his daughter, feeling his own eyes fill with tears. "Me too," he whispered. "I feel complete too." Agnieszka joined their embrace, creating a circle in which flowed love and understanding deeper than words could express. After the concert, there was a banquet. Guests approached Tomasz, congratulating him on his performance, but also on his return to health, to life, to his family. Some remembered him from before the accident, when he was a promising pianist. Others only now got to know him as the husband of Agnieszka Nowak and father of Zofia. Among them was also Dr. Wojciech, who approached Tomasz with a glass of champagne. "A spectacular performance," he said, raising his glass in a toast, "and an even more spectacular recovery." "Thanks to you," Tomasz replied, clinking glasses with him. "Without your help. You would have managed without my help anyway." The doctor interrupted him with a smile. "It might have taken more time, but I am convinced that your mind was seeking healing on its own. I just helped the process a little. Nevertheless, I am grateful. Tomasz emphasized for everything you did for me and for Zofia." The doctor nodded and then leaned in confidentially. "There is something you should know," he said quietly. "Something we discovered while examining medical records from the period following the accident." Tomasz straightened up suddenly, alarmed. "What is it about?" "It was no accident that you were misidentified as deceased," Dr. Wojciech explained. "Someone deliberately manipulated the documents. Someone who wanted you to disappear." Tomasz felt the blood drain from his face. "Who? Why?" "We are still investigating this," the doctor replied, "but everything indicates that it was related to Agnieszka's company. At that time, Novak Industries was taking over a smaller company that was on the verge of bankruptcy. The transaction was controversial, and Agnieszka, as a young, ambitious businesswoman, had many opponents. "Do you think someone wanted to hurt her by hitting me?" Tomasz asked, shocked. "This is one of the theories," the doctor admitted, "but there are other threads as well. Your father was a judge, remember? He handled several high-profile corruption cases before his death. Maybe it was retaliation?" Tomasz shook his head, trying to process this information. "Why are you telling me this? Why now?" Dr. Wojciech looked around to make sure no one was listening, because the study is still ongoing. He said quietly, "And it may turn out that some people you trust are involved in this." "Agnes?" Tomasz asked, his voice barely audible. "No, not her," the doctor quickly assured him. "Agnieszka was a victim, just like you." But others hesitated. "Be careful, Tomasz, and watch carefully." With these words he left, leaving Tomasz with new questions and doubts. But before he could think about them further, he felt a light touch on his shoulder. "Everything's all right?" Agnieszka asked, approaching him. Thomas looked at her, at the woman who had never stopped believing in him, who had welcomed him back into her life. Despite 15 years of separation, despite his changed appearance and personality, a woman who loved him again, just as he was now. "Yes," he replied, smiling at her, "everything is perfect. Whatever secrets lay in his past, whatever challenges lay ahead, one thing was certain. He was no longer alone. He had a family, he had a purpose, he had music, and that was all he needed." Late in the evening, as the guests began to leave, Tomasz, Agnieszka, and Zofia stood in the same foyer where it all began 6 months earlier. The place was the same, but they were different people. "This is where we met," Zofia said as if reading his thoughts. "This is where you taught me how to dance." "I remember," Tomasz replied, putting his arm around her. "I remember every second of that evening." "Me too," Agnieszka added, standing next to them. "I remember seeing you for the first time after 15 years. I couldn't believe my eyes." And now, Tomasz asked, looking at her with tenderness, do you believe now? Now I know, she replied, taking his hand. I know it's really you, that you've really come back to us, and I'll never leave again. He promised, pulling her closer and embracing both of them, his wife and daughter, in a tight family embrace. As they emerged from the Philharmonic Hall into the cool starry night, Tomasz looked up at the sky, thinking about the extraordinary journey that had led him to this moment, about all the difficult days and nights, about the years spent on the street, about loneliness, cold, and hunger, about everything he lost and everything he regained, and thought about that one extraordinary night when a homeless man danced with a blind girl in the elegant foyer of the Philharmonic, not knowing that it was his own daughter, about how one simple human connection, a gesture of kindness, a hand extended in help, could change everything. Sometimes in life we meet people who change our path in the most unexpected ways. Sometimes chance encounters turn out to be destiny, and sometimes what seems lost forever waits patiently for us to find our way back to it. The story of Tomasz and Zofia reminds us that we should never lose hope, that even in the darkest night there can be light, that even after years of separation, after years of living in different worlds, hearts that belong together can find their way back together. It also reminds us that every act of kindness, even something as simple as dancing with a lonely child, can have enormous power. It can change the life not only of the person receiving help, but also of the person providing it. Because after all, isn't that what being human is all about? About extending a hand to those who need it, even if we didn't have much ourselves. About sharing warmth, even when our own lives are cold. About seeing humanity in everyone we meet along the way. Tomasz lost his identity, his memories, his place in the world, but he never lost his humanity. And it was this humanity, this ability to notice a lonely child, to give him attention, to teach him to dance that brought him back home. Because home is not an address, not a building, not the things we own. Home is the people we love, the bonds we create. That feeling that somewhere in this vast world there is a place where we truly belong. And no matter how far we stray, how long we are cut off from our roots, there is always a chance that we will find our way back, that the music of our hearts will lead us to those who are waiting for us, even if they don't know it themselves. So the next time you meet someone who seems lost, who stands on the margins of society, who needs help, reach out, dance with them, even metaphorically, because you never know what story their heart holds. And you never know how your simple gesture could change their life and maybe your own. After all, as the story of Tomasz and Zofia shows, sometimes the simplest gestures lead to the greatest miracles. And our paths cross not by chance, but because deep down we recognize those who belong to us, even if our minds do not remember it.